So, I actually haven't read this article, but because I've already read so many of them like it, but I actually, yeah. Does this have
I feel like
like the
this
actual?
article like thoroughly touches on.
Okay, does it have the actual scriptures associated with
Yeah, it has
each of the
scripture. It
times the numbers are
shows.
brought up? Okay, cool. Let's go. We'll just go
Yes.
over it then. Do you want to? Do you want me to clip this into a separate video once I get to it when we're no longer live, or do you want this?
Yeah,
Okay,
let's
cool.
go ahead and do
Oh,
that.
we'll leave it like this for now. All right.
We'll do two separate ones, one for the calendar and one for the 15th.
Okay. So I'll go over it. I haven't read it, so it'll be fun. So what is the true Sabbath day? This scriptural calendar study proves a pattern of Sabbath falling on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th of the scriptural calendar, which is only possible on the luni-solar calendar. Jews, Hebrew roots, Torah only, and Seventh day Adventists proclaim that Saturday is the Sabbath, but as we saw in the. See, I hate titles. Torah only and Hebrew roots, like, believe. Okay, whatever. There's many different beliefs, but okay. So they, as we saw in a repeating 6-1 cycle is invalid link study. I wonder what, does that have a link on it? It does not. Okay. I'm guessing that had a link at one point. Scriptures declare that there is a new moon day, which interrupts that cycle. This means that the Sabbath cannot be on any fixed day of the Roman Gregorian calendar, as they are incompatible. People debate about whether the new moon is a separate day. They state that the Jews have kept track of the Sabbath and it lines up with Saturday. But Scripture clearly defines a pattern of Sabbaths that fall on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th of the biblical month, which can only happen on a luni-solar calendar. Put aside Jewish fables and listen to the collective witness of these verses. In the middle of the month, the full moon would appear. The full moon would be shining bright during the major feast days of unleavened bread and tabernacles, which occur on the 15th of the first and 7th month. Because the holy feast days of unleavened bread and tabernacles occurs on the 15th, which is a Sabbath day, they are called a high Sabbath. John 19:31 tells us that the day after Passover is the Sabbath, meaning it's the 7th day of the week. Then it adds that it is a high Sabbath, meaning it is also a feast day. Therefore, since it was the preparation day, that the body should not remain on the stake on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high one. The Yehudim asked Pilate to have their legs broken and that they be taken away. This proves that the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which Scripture declares is on the 15th of the first biblical month, is always on the 7th-day Sabbath. This proves that this weekly Sabbaths are always on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th of each lunisolar month. Hopefully there'll be more verses because there's so many more that show that. Since the calendar resets every month based on the lunar cycle, the first day, new moon day, of the next month can land on any Gregorian calendar day. And the Sabbaths, which fall on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th, would also fall on that same day. For example, if the first day of the new biblical month fell on Wednesday of the Roman calendar, then the weekly Sabbaths would fall on Wednesday as well, as they occur every 7th day. Below is how the month calendar with the weekly Sabbaths would look for the first month of the year, which occurs in spring and includes the holy feast days of Passover and unleavened bread. As you can see, the holy feast day of unleavened bread falls on the 15th on the Sabbath day, making it a high Sabbath. So, yeah, this is a typical, when you have a lunisolar calendar, this is what it looks like always. And it works out perfectly because when you think about it, the moon is 28-day cycle. It's, aside from occasionally it like might be on a different day. It might show up on a different day, which we don't have the, I think, yeah, Elena's like, yeah, there's something we're missing there. But for the most part, it's literally new moon,
I'm
starts your,
wondering if because there isn't there like four transition days for the seasons, right? I wonder if those don't align with those extra days that
would,
are like, I don't know.
it wouldn't surprise me. Because I don't know exactly how often it happens, but there is an occasional extra new moon day.
Yeah, and it
Which is
just
why they
happened.
always had to wait
And
at the
it
temple
does
and
seem
look.
like we're switching seasons and it just happened. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So, I
Yeah,
don't
that
know.
did. Yeah, because it did just happen a couple. What wasn't it?
This last one, we had a day in between,
Yeah.
and it was weird. It felt
Which is
different.
why we wait for the moon
And I
and
think
for
isn't
Israel to
that I'm
tell us
not
when it
sure.
happens.
This article does not address that, but
Okay.
I think it is in the book of Enoch.
I'll have to look that up. I was digging in Enoch quite a bit, but there's a lot in there. All right, so Leviticus 23:39. The Father commanded us to start the Feast of Tabernacles on the 15th day of the 7th month, which is a Sabbath, making it a high Sabbath. Then on the 8th day of the feast, on the 22nd, he said, it is also a Sabbath, proving the pattern of 8, 15, 22, and 29. Also on the 15th day of the 7th month, when ye have gathered in the fruit of the land, ye shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. On the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. And instead of debating verses about the Sabbath, which causes most people's minds to blur, let's focus on clear examples in Scripture which reveal the truth. Here are many scriptural proofs which show that the weekly Sabbaths occur on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th of each luni-solar month. So Exodus chapter 20 lists the 10 commandments, but when Moses repeats the commandments in Deuteronomy chapter 5, there's something unusual. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. It's so weird. And rested this 7th day, wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So that's Exodus 28 and 11, and then Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15. Keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. And remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord thy God brought thee out thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. So the 4th commandment in Deuteronomy does not mention creation at all as a reason for the Sabbath. Instead, it talks about the exodus from Egypt. When did the Almighty bring them out from Egypt with a mighty hand? So what is that? Huh. Yeah, interesting. And they departed from Ramesses the 1st month on the 15th day of the 1st month on the morrow after the Passover. The children of Israel went out with an high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians. Numbers 33:3. Observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God, for in the month of Abib the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Deuteronomy 16:1. It is well known that they left Egypt on the Sabbath of unleavened bread at night. People today teach that the Sabbath of unleavened bread is different from the 7th-day Sabbath. But here they seem to be related or even the same. They are linked by the 4th commandment as recorded in 2 different renderings. The 4th commandment in Exodus 20 clearly references the 7th-day Sabbath based on creation, and then the 4th commandment in Deuteronomy 5 clearly references the 7th-day Sabbath based on the deliverance from Egypt, which occurred on the evening of the Sabbath of unleavened bread. The Israelites left Egypt on the day after Passover, the Sabbath of unleavened bread, and it was the 15th day of the 1st month. Passover is the 14th day of the 1st month of the year. Scripture proves that the 15th of the 1st luni-solar month is a Sabbath day. In the 1st month, Abib, of the biblical calendar, the Passover falls on the 14th day, and the high Sabbath of the Feast of Unleavened Bread falls on the 15th. And the 14th day of the 1st month at even is the Lord's Passover, and on the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread unto the Lord. 7 days ye must eat unleavened bread. In the 1st day ye shall have an holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein. Leviticus 23:5-7. The Feast of First Fruits is celebrated on the day after the 1st day of unleavened bread, which is the weekly Sabbath. Again, confirming that it occurs on the 15th. When ye be come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then ye shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord, to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. Leviticus 23:10-11. The scripture proves that 40 years after the Israelites left Egypt, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, High Sabbath, continued to be on the 15th. The cycle of a new moon day, 6 work days, and a weekly Sabbath day continued for 40 years. At the end of the 40 years, after the high day Sabbath of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the manna ceased on the next day, a work day, on which they would have normally gathered it, and they entered into Canaan. And the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at even in the plains of Jericho. And they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn in the selfsame day. And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of all the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. Joshua 5:10-12. Some argue that the Father provided manna to the Israelites for 6 days and had them gather a double portion the day before the Sabbath. But they had herds of animals, flour and oils to prepare, bread, etc., so they did not just survive on manna every day for 40 years. The Father used the manna to teach them the monthly cycles and weekly Sabbaths and to test them. The monthly cycle of the stars and moon declare the glory of our Creator. When you follow the Roman solar-based calendar, you are out of sync with the Father's creation. By observing the months and weekly Sabbaths around the lunar cycle, this causes his followers to be in synchronicity with the heavenly realms of worship. I don't know, what? Reword the following to add to the above. So I guess they added. Exactly 1 lunar month after they left Egypt, the people congregated together on the 15th day of the month, and they took that opportunity to complain to Moses about the lack of food. The story is in Exodus 16. It specifically said that the quails would come at even and that the bread would come the next morning. The simplest explanation for this is that the day, the 15th of the month, was the Sabbath, and that the people were to wait until after sunset before gathering food. The quail was given in the evening after the Sabbath had passed. The manna was given on the mornings of all the work days, and twice as much on the preparation day, the day before the Sabbath. So the first month, unleavened bread Sabbath was the 15th. Second month, Sabbath, when they complained, was the 15th. And then third month, when was the Sabbath? On the third month, the whole congregation assembled before the Almighty. When did this assembly occur? On the 15th day of the third month. They left Egypt on the 15th day of the first month, and they came to Sinai on the 15th day of the third month. In the third month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. Exodus 19:1. The dedication of the priesthood of Aaron and his sons was on the 8th day Sabbath. During the first month of the second year since their departure from Egypt, in which Passover was to be kept, Aaron and his sons were inducted into the priesthood and sanctified for 7 days, beginning on New Moon Day. Exodus 42:17. On the 8th day, which was the 8th day of the lunar month, there was an assembly of the congregation for worship, identifying the 7th day Sabbath. Solomon honored the 22nd day Sabbath. Solomon faithfully kept the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days, starting on the 15th of the month, and High Sabbath. As commanded, they made a solemn assembly on the 22nd, the next weekly Sabbath. He then sent the people away on the 8th day, the 23rd of the month, which was the first day of the week. So we have a confirmation of the 15th being the High Sabbath and the 22nd being the next Sabbath. 2 Chronicles 7:8-10. King Hezekiah honored the 8th day Sabbath. The people began to sanctify on New Moon Day of the first month. Then on the 8th of the month, they went to the temple. On the 16th of the month, they made an end, which was the first day of the work week. 2 Chronicles 29:17. Here again, the Sabbaths are fixed to the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29 lunar calendar dates. After the famous Battle of Jericho, they rested on the 8th day, the weekly Sabbath. The Israelites marched around Jericho for 7 days in offensive battle readiness and attacked the city on the 7th day. If the continually repeating 6 work days, 1 Sabbath day cycle were true, then they would have been walking on a Sabbath day, which is a clear violation of the Father's commands. This is explained by the fact that the first day was the new moon day, the first day of the month. They marched for 6 more days, and then they rested on the 8th, the weekly Sabbath. The book of Jasher, which is not in the Bible but is historically useful, even says the march started on the new moon day. So in the famous Battle of Jericho, the Israelites marched around Jericho for 7 days. I think, yeah, some of that is going to be repeated. Yeah. And it says, our Messiah healed the blind man on the 22nd day on the weekly Sabbath. The last day of the Feast of Tabernacles is fixed to the 21st day of the 7th month of Ethanim? Leviticus 23:34, and then 36 and 39 through 41. Numbers 29. Trying to see if those are the ones I'm about to read, but I don't think so. Numbers 29:12, Deuteronomy 16, all those, yeah. I'm guessing those are all different examples. Okay. So our Messiah Yahusha attended the Feast of Tabernacles, John 7:10. On the last day of the feast, the 21st of the 7th month, Messiah stood and spoke, which is in John 7:37 and Leviticus. Oh, compare with Leviticus 23:33. I'm curious.
Okay, so I want to just go back for a second because I looked up the book of Jasher, chapter 88, verse 14, and it was in the second moon on the first day of the moon that Jehovah said to Yehoshua, rise up, and behold, I have given Jericho into thy hand with all thy people thereof, and all you fighting men shall go round the city once each day. Thus shall you do for 6 days. And on the 7th day they went round the city 7 times, and the priest blew upon the trumpets. So they did not march upon the Sabbath day for Yahuwah, to command a war march on the 7th day Sabbath would be contradictory to his commands. But yeah, that's what it said there. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just like looking at these. I'm like, dude, I actually want to compare these.
I had to look that up while you were reading it.
Yeah.
Sorry, my cats are like running around being loud, trying to get on the computer. I was keeping my mic off for those
You're
reasons.
good. Our Messiah spent that night of the 21st on the Mount of Olives. The next morning, the 22nd of the 7th month, our Messiah returned to the temple because it was the 7th day Sabbath, which is listed there. And then at the temple, Messiah healed a blind man on the Sabbath, which was the issue. Yeah. The healing of the blind man caused great anger among the priests, for it was the 7th day Sabbath. They believed it was a sin to perform such a miracle upon the Sabbath day. This places the weekly 7th day Sabbaths in our Messiah's time on those dates as well. Healed the blind man. So John 7:2 says it was a Feast of Tabernacles for what? That same blind man healing? What? Oh. 7:37 says that on the last great day of the 7-day feast, Yahushua announced that he was the source of living water. And then in John 7:53 we read that everyone went home for the night. And the next verse, John 8:1 said Yeshua. Why do they always switch it in the same? Okay, so Yeshua there, but wasn't it Yahushua up there? Went to the Mount of Olives. The next verse says that in the morning they all went to the temple. The actual healing and the reaction of the Pharisees is the subject of John chapter 9. And then some people try to use this scripture to say that the Sabbath was on the 23rd, but this argument requires that the Feast of Tabernacles be 8 days long, not 7 days, as specified in Leviticus. So Christ's death on Passover proves that the Sabbath is not Saturday or Sunday. Our Messiah died in 31 AD on Passover. The new moon day of the first month of the biblical calendar, which occurred in 31 AD, was on 3/13. The Passover occurs on the 14th of the month, which means that Messiah died on 3/26, a Monday. As you can see, there's no way that Messiah rose 3 days later on a Saturday or Sunday. The point is moot, as the Roman calendar in 31 AD was an 8-day calendar, which did not even have a day named Sunday. It was an 8-day calendar? That's weird. We gotta find that 8-day calendar. Look that up. I'm curious. Alright. The first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, a high Sabbath, occurred on the 7th day of the week, which was 327 AD. And he rose again the next day on the Feast of First Fruits, which was the first day of the next week. This invalidates the Messiah rose on Saturday or Sunday, which is used by people to justify that day as the Sabbath. The high Sabbath feast days in both spring and fall occur on the 15th. Every time in Scripture where the Feast of Unleavened Bread or the Feast of Tabernacles is mentioned, they are always fixed to a 7th-day Sabbath. There is no mention in Scripture of either of these set-apart feasts commencing on a day other than the 7th-day Sabbath. The beginning lunar calendar date for both was always the 15th, counting from the new moon. Therefore, this fixed all the other Sabbaths for the 1st and 7th month of the 8th, or on the 8th, 22nd, and 29th each year. Back in Leviticus 23 and Numbers 29 again. Which I believe we did read that. Or, well, no, this one's 6 months. So 6 months later, the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles also falls on the 15th, which is fixed to a 7th-day Sabbath as well. This 7th-day feast is followed 8 days later by a sacred convocation on the 22nd each and every single year. So these two feast days, according to Scripture, consistently commence on the 7th-day Sabbath, which are identified as the 15th in their respective months, a full 6 months apart exactly. Using the biblical criteria above, it is impossible to place both feasts 6 months apart and have them both commence on the 15th of the Roman Gregorian calendar month and be on a Saturday. If perchance one year it happens to successfully work out, it cannot occur 2 years in a row, and definitely not every year, as is required by Scripture. The problem lies within the Gregorian calendar's promotion of the unbroken cycle of successive weeks. Over and over again, Scripture demonstrates that it has never utilized an unbroken continuous weekly cycle in those Numbers and Leviticus, and then they have links. So this is, let's see, Israelites left Egypt on the day after Passover. Yeah. So there's a lot of good evidence in the Scriptures themselves that point out this 8, 15, 22, and 29. So, and there's literally never any other date other than those dates mentioned, which should tell us something. But there's a lot more that tells us that too. Like, why were they so focused on new moon? They had so many I don't know how many people they had. I'd have to look it up. But looking at the moon, trying to determine, because they had to figure out when the new month was. Like, why would they need to know that? Like, why was it so particular? But even then, the sacrifices get me, because if you go and look, I'd have to go look up which chapters they're in again, but if you go and read the sacrifices for the new moon and then the sacrifices for the Sabbath, they're different sacrifices. And it doesn't make sense for two different sacrifices to fall on the same day, which happens multiple times a year, every year, that you have to figure out which sacrifice you're doing. The one for the Sabbath or one for the new moon, which doesn't make sense, because that just sounds like God's calendar isn't working properly. When it does work properly, it works exactly as it should. Quite well, as Enoch describes it.
So this is the new moons and translation days. It's a 16-minute video, but I'm pretty sure this explains what we're looking at.
Translation days. Time can only be measured.
I don't know why I thought I was going to let you hear it. Alright, man.
To movement. The hands of a clock moving around a clock face describe hours, minutes, and seconds. Without movement, time cannot be measured. The modern calendar is a solar calendar. On the modern calendar, weeks and months are not based on anything in nature. They are completely arbitrary. The luni-solar calendar, established by Yahweh at the creation of the world, is different. The calendar of creation is based entirely on nature. From its years to its months, from its weeks to its days, all is based on movement. The word month was originally moonth. It comes from the word moon. In ancient times, months were always based on the movement of the moon. Weeks, in turn, were divisions of the month, or lunation. The Hebrew Sabbaton was celebrated at intervals of 7 days, corresponding with changes in the moon's phases. The biggest difference between Yahweh's luni-solar calendar and the papal solar calendar in use today is found in the fact the months and weeks of the biblical calendar are also based on movement in nature. The modern calendar has months ranging in length from 28 days to 31 days. The months are not anchored to anything in nature. Consequently, the week cycles continuously and without interruption from one month to the next and from one year to the next. The Creator's calendar bases each month on the movement of the moon. Each month begins with the new moon. The week, a division of the month, restarts its cycle every new moon. The Hebrew month is a lunar month, and the quarter of this period, one phase of the moon, appears to have determined the week of 7 days. This is the hardest point to comprehend when first beginning to study the calendar of creation. The modern solar calendar has a continuous weekly cycle. The calendar of creation does not. The Sabbath, depending, in Israel's nomadic period, upon the observation of the phases of the moon, could not, according to this view, be a fixed day. New moons are important to understand because the weekly cycle restarts for the new month at new moon. In Scripture, new moon can refer to the first day of the new month, the period of time between one new moon and the next, a calendar month. Many people are confused over what to do on new moon or how to observe it, since months on the Gregorian calendar are divorced from anything in nature. Scripture reveals several things about the observance of new moon. 1. New moons were non-commerce days. 2. New moons were days of thanksgiving. And 3. New moons were days of worship. Non-commerce days. When in apostasy, the Jews resented having to close their stores for Sabbaths and new moons. The Bible records the lament of these greedy merchants. When will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit? Work done for the tabernacle, however, was allowable. The tabernacle of Moses was assembled on a new moon day. However, no work that generated income, no commerce was to be performed on new moon, nor any other routine labor that could be performed on other days. Days of Thanksgiving. New moons were a time for families to get together, share a meal, and rejoice over the blessings of the past month, rededicating themselves to Yahweh for the new. Worship days. Where scripture is silent, history can shed additional light. An early edition of the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia states that new moons were originally days for worship. The new moon is still, and the Sabbath originally was, dependent upon the lunar cycle. Both date back to the nomadic period of Israel. Originally, the new moon was celebrated in the same way as the Sabbath. Gradually, it became less important, while the Sabbath became more a day of religion and humanity, of religious meditation and instruction, of peace and delight of the soul. Translation days have no direct correlation in the modern solar calendar. However, it is necessary to understand what they are in order to have a clear comprehension of Yahweh's calendar. Translation day is an astronomical term not found in Scripture. However, the fact the biblical months were based on the cycles of the moon is sufficient proof they exist in the biblical calendar. Astronomically, a lunation is 29.5 days long. A lunation never has less than 29 days or more than 30 days. Astronomers use the term translation day to designate the 30th day of a lunation. It falls at the end of a lunar cycle on the black moon, when the moon cannot be seen. Time itself is continuous. Because it is, many have believed the system by which time is calculated must also be continuous. This is incorrect. Originally, all ancient calendars were luni-solar, with an interrupted weekly cycle. The weekly cycle restarted at the beginning of the month, lunation, or at the beginning of the year, following 5 intercalated days that closed the previous year. These 5 intercalary days were not part of any weekly cycle. All time must be accounted for. Thus, translation days are not non-days. They have a date, the 30th of every 30-day month. The 30th of the month, like the first of the month, was not part of the 7-day weekly cycle. However, it was counted and did have a date. Confusion over translation days has led some people to reject the biblical luni-solar calendar. The fourth commandment clearly states, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of Yahweh thy Elohim. Not understanding translation days had led to the false assumption that in a 30-day month there are a total of 8 days between the last Sabbath of one month and the next Sabbath of the new month. This appears to create a problem because 8 days is no longer than the 6 workday interval between Sabbaths prescribed in the fourth commandment. However, because new moons are a type of holy day, there are never more than 6 workdays between worship days. The assumption there will be too many workdays between Sabbaths comes from not understanding the new moon itself is a worship day that starts a new cycle of 4 weeks. In the time of the earliest prophets, the new moon stood in the same line with another lunar observance, the Sabbath. The new moon begins the new weekly cycle for the new month So translation days are not part of that weekly cycle, even though they are a day with a date. Translation days are always the 30th on a lunar month. They can never be transferred to the next month or counted as a date in the new month, because the next month always starts with New Moon Day, the day following Translation Day. With the new moon, a new cycle of 4 weeks begins. Yahweh has always clearly specified by name or date which days are to be kept holy. Thus, all days not specifically designated as holy days are work days. The Gregorian solar calendar has different categories of days: weekdays, weekends, when most people take off work, and national holidays. The biblical calendar has 3 categories of worship days. 1, weekly, seventh-day Sabbaths. 2, monthly, new moons. 3, annual, yearly feasts. Many people convicted to worship by the biblical calendar keep the weekly and yearly observances, but the monthly observance of new moon is frequently overlooked. This is partly through ignorance of how to observe the new moon. However, the importance of new moons can be seen in the fact
I was trying to see how much more it gets into if it's like important.
I think that pretty much covered it.
Yeah.
Where's that verse?
I think it talks about the sacrifices that we didn't talk about, but we don't have to. That they're.
Yeah.
See what I mean?
Yeah,
the different sacrifices and stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, like if you were to have the new moon that didn't really go with the Sabbaths and stuff like that, the sacrifices would be different, and it would really complicate things if the Sabbath and new moon fell on the same day. So
I can't imagine. They'd have to have 2 completely different teams of like priests and stuff working on 2 completely different day type deals. Like, it doesn't work that.
It would have been chaos.
Yeah, no.
In the temple.
But it reminded me of that verse, not to judge people based on their new moons and their Sabbaths and stuff like that. And that guy, when he said, like, nobody celebrates new moons, I'm like, I don't know if you know off the top of your head what verse that is, but that's constantly used to say, oh, don't judge me for what holidays I celebrate. And I'm like, it literally says, don't let people judge you for new moons, Sabbaths, and feasts. Do Christians celebrate new moons? No. Do they celebrate the Sabbath? No. Do they celebrate the feast? No. You're not the ones being judged. It's those people who celebrate those things that are being judged. And they're saying, don't worry about being judged if you choose to keep my new moons and my Sabbaths and my feasts. Like,
yeah, it's Colossians 2:16 and 17. Yeah. And that's the thing. That's all. And then it says it's the shadow of things to come, and the substance is of Christ. So that just is meaning, like, you know, he's the spirit of prophecy, Messiah is the spirit of prophecy, so all this stuff is like a shadow of him. His, not just his, what he did on the cross, that, and it's done, you don't have to do nothing anymore. It's a shadow of the first coming and the second coming. So all the new moons are significant. And then all of this is teaching us things, like watching the new moons, how each month is a constellation, and trying to like unlearn the like astrological meanings of these things and dig a little bit deeper and see what it means in scripture. Like Virgo is the woman who gives birth, and that's pointing, like, that shows us that like Revelation 12 is pointing to Day of Atonement and stuff, and then we see that that is when, you know, the Revelation 12 sign actually occurred during the Day of Atonement, and it was like these things start to come together after you're keeping the new moons and the proper calendar and things like that. So that's why they've taken those kinds of scriptures and twisted them, because they don't want us to be on the proper calendar, because that's like one of God's biggest ways of protecting us is to like have us on his calendar. Everything, once you learn everything in his law has a reason, then you look at all of the different. Like his feasts are for gathering us and getting us in the right place at the right time.
And of course, that's celebrating the Sabbaths is our mark. That is our everlasting covenant, or all the generations.
Yeah.
That's your sign of who you belong to.
Right. And it says that we will come from from Sabbath to Sabbath, new moon to new moon.
Yep.
I don't remember what scripture that is, but yeah.
I like that. All of creation was designed to reveal truths about the Creator. So true. Sorry.
Yep. So that channel is a good channel for this stuff too. But all right, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you later. Good night.
Peace.
I don't remember what scripture that is, but yeah.
I like that. All of creation was designed to reveal truths about the Creator. So true. Sorry.
Yep. So that channel is a good channel for this stuff too. But all right, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you later. Good night.
Peace.